Am I the asshole for renting my house to a friend with poor financial habits? Now she's offering to buy it for a ridiculously low price, even just $1? Let me take you back. I'm 31, and I grew up pretty poor. I don't remember it all that clearly, but I'll never forget those moments when my parents and I could barely afford to eat beans and rice. That was it. We were scraping by, but somehow, my parents clawed their way out of poverty. They're not rich by any means, but they're comfortable now, and that's a huge deal. I use what I went through as a kid to keep myself motivated, always cautious with my money. I got my first job in high school, taking on odd jobs whenever I could. I saved every penny, even rode my bike everywhere to avoid gas costs. By the time I moved out of my parents' house, I had just over $17,000 saved up. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I don't have that much saved anymore, but I've invested and built an emergency fund. I take my family's finances seriously. I never want my kids to go through what I did. The choices my husband and I made with our money allowed us to buy a house in early 2015. We bought it 50-50 with his mom. He paid his part up front, I made a huge down payment, and his mom covered the rest. We had an escrow agreement where I'd pay her back what she'd purchased. Over time, I completely paid off my half, and now, the house belongs entirely to my husband and me. It's a 4-bedroom, 1.5 bath, 2-story home, complete with a finished basement and a 2-car garage, sitting on a double lot. We got it for an absolute steal at $118,000 from a for-sale by owner listing. Since we moved in, we've installed a fence, updated the oven, washer, dryer, water heater, and furnace, and we've repainted every room. The house doesn't need much more, just cosmetic updates. The exterior is a gross brown-pink color, which we've started repainting. The hardwood floors are warped from being over 100 years old and from having dogs. The bathroom could use an upgrade, but structurally, it's solid. If I were to rate the house on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being a teardown and 5 being ready for market at $300,000, I'd say it's sitting at about a 3.5. Now, with that backstory out of the way, let me get to what's been my biggest headache for the past 4 years. I have a friend, let's call her Carrie, 27, who grew up with a very similar background to mine. She faced the same struggles but never really figured out how to manage money. She can't keep savings above $50 for long. It's not that she doesn't try, I think it's a mix of lack of self-control and being too focused on immediate needs when she gets paid. Whatever it is, it's always someone else's problem when she runs out of funds. I don't blame her for it, though. Learning how to budget wasn't something school taught, and I spent years figuring out my own balance. The freedom of spending without restrictions is tempting, but at some point, you have to take responsibility. Throughout our friendship, I've helped Carrie build countless budgets. I made about the same amount of money as she did, but no matter what we tried, the plans failed. We tried everything, tricking her brain into saving, teaching her to treat the money sitting in her account as off-limits for anything other than bills. But every time, she blew through her money. Eventually, I gave up. I told her the quickest way to get her finances under control was to get a paycheck, but she didn't want to be treated like a child with an allowance. Fair enough. I washed my hands of it. Carrie moved out of her mom's house a little over 6 years ago, into a mutual friend's place, let's call her Tia. From what I understand, Carrie paid little to no rent, even though they both worked at the same company and made similar salaries. The living conditions? A disaster. She moved into the basement, and it was a miracle if there was even a clear path to the washer and dryer. She asked me repeatedly to come over and help her clean and organize, and because I'm a people pleaser, I always agreed. Every time I went over, we made significant progress. But by the following weekend, the space looked like a tornado had hit it again. I have no idea how she managed to fit so much into that tiny room. She wouldn't clean up after herself or make any effort to put anything away. If anyone came over, it was always me doing the cleaning while she sat back, offering suggestions. Trying to get her to donate or throw anything away was like pulling teeth. Even the tiniest scrap of paper had sentimental value. After more than a year of living together, Tia had enough. She told Carrie it was time to find another place to live. She wasn't going to kick her out onto the street, but she couldn't live with her any longer. There were other issues building up that led to this, but I won't get into those now. Around the same time, my husband and I had purchased a second home. Our first house was paid off, my husband had received an inheritance, and we were searching for our forever home, one that better suited our needs and wants. The best part? Our new home was just a 5-minute drive from the old house. We hadn't yet decided whether to sell or rent out the first house when Carrie approached us with an offer. She and 2 friends were looking to move in together, and our house was the perfect size for them. All of them wanted their own rooms and privacy, and since we hadn't yet decided whether to sell the house, we figured renting it out could be a good way to generate passive income, investing it toward our future. We agreed we'd revisit the idea of selling or keeping it as a rental later. But there was one thing I missed, a subtle red flag. From the start, Carly began referring to the house as her house. Even before she'd signed a lease or moved in, she was already acting as if it was hers. She had already convinced the other 2 girls to back out. When I first wrote up the lease, I set the rent at a flexible rate depending on the number of tenants. For the 3 of them, it would only be $750 per month, a ridiculously good deal in this area where a single bedroom could easily go for $400. If only one person rented it, the price would go up to $1,400. We didn't need the money, this was just to cover the basics like insurance, power, heat, and property taxes. But over the 4 years Carly lived there, the rent went up 4 times. The first increase was to $500 due to rising power bills. Then, it went to $550 for the same reason. A third increase, to $750, came after Carly got a new job. And just last year, in October, more on that later, there was another jump. Along with the rising rent, 2 separate potential roommates had backed out. Why? Because Carly had started setting the rules, referring to the place as her house, even though she had no claim to it. Each of those roommates would have had their own lease, but that didn't matter to Carly. She was already acting like she owned it. When Carly first moved in, she was working a minimum wage job, and she was my friend. So I kept the rent low. But about 1.5 years ago, she landed a new job at a local university. It paid well, with great benefits, and it was only a 30-minute drive away. Yet somehow, no matter how much she earned, she managed to blow through her paycheck. I don't even know what she was spending it on. Over those 4 years, she ended up owing me $750 in back rent. Each month, her budget seemed to be miscalculated, and she overspent on things she didn't need, then shoved her unpaid bills onto us. My husband and I quickly realized that being landlords wasn't for us. We had too much on our plates, and we couldn't keep up with all the maintenance. Carly wasn't holding up her end of the agreement. So, we made the decision to sell, but we didn't want to throw Carly out. We informed her of our plans, and she proposed buying the house from us. She started looking into getting a loan. But as she went down this path, she realized something: the house wasn't what she wanted. She wanted land. Our house was far too big for her. She told us this, and we understood. I even offered to drive her to meet with realtors so she could look at other properties. She saw several houses, but each one fell through when she realized she wouldn't get any special deals or discounts, and that all of the loans she looked at required at least a 10% down payment, money she didn't have. That's when the entitlement really kicked in. Carly couldn't afford the house she wanted, so she set her sights on ours. We had briefly discussed a rent-to-own situation at the very beginning of her tenancy, but there was no formal agreement, no sale price, no appraisals, no inspections, nothing had been signed. It was just a casual conversation, a maybe thrown out in passing. But somehow, Carly took that as an agreement. She believed that the 2.5 years of rent she'd paid should count toward the purchase price of the house. I reminded her that we had never signed anything for a rent-to-own deal. The way she saw it, though, that didn't matter. She started suggesting we quit-claim deed the property to her, without paying us anything beyond the rent she'd already given us. A quit-claim deed is a faster, cheaper way of transferring property ownership, but even in this case, something still needs to be paid for. By that point, Carly had paid about $11,000 in rent, more than half of which went toward utilities and property taxes, costs that we had covered. Yet, she was acting like she owed us nothing more. I told her again that this wasn't going to work. Our house was in great condition, and even with the exterior needing work and the floors and bathroom needing updates, it was still worth at least what we had paid for it, $118K. Carly, however, tried to spin the situation, claiming she was doing us a favor by taking it off our hands, since I had told her we were tired of being landlords. But she wasn't about to walk away from this deal without trying one last attempt, offering me $1. Yes, you heard that right, a single dollar. I wasn't sure if this was some kind of failed joke on her part, but it certainly didn't land. I was livid, so angry, in fact, that I was shaking. I managed to laugh it off, but inside, I was furious. And this wasn't the first time Carly had crossed a line. During the time she lived in the house, my husband and I had stored some of our things in the garage. Carly parked on the street for convenience, and on multiple occasions, she suggested that we start paying her rent for the space our stuff was occupying in our house. Never mind that it was all out of her way, and we had already made it clear that once the house was sold, we'd be removing our property. Then, at the end of 2022, Carly started dating Reggie, a 28-year-old guy. They had a long-distance relationship, taking turns visiting each other. Carly mentioned to Reggie that we were looking to sell the house, and we tossed out a few numbers, our lowest being $1.1 million. We told her it was just an estimate, subject to appraisal and market value. But Reggie offered to buy the house from us anyway. He said he'd start the process. By March and April of 2023, a strange sense of relief settled over me. My husband felt it too. Carly felt it as well, this collective moment where everything seemed to be falling into place. But there was something creeping beneath the surface, something I couldn't quite grasp yet. Reggie, for one, seemed like a man with a plan. A retired Marine, he got a monthly check from the government, around $2,000, on top of a well-paying job. Carly told me he was probably making around $4,000 to $5,000 a month. Things were looking good. Then, just as we were starting to feel hopeful, Carly and Reggie informed us that they wouldn't be able to start the purchase process right away. Reggie couldn't afford both his rent and the mortgage. They said they'd have to push things back until October when he planned to move in with Carly. But that wasn't the end of the story. Before Reggie even moved in, an ex-friend of Carly's had offered to rent a room in the house, agreeing to pay Carly despite the clear clause in the lease that subletting wasn't allowed. Carly, however, generously decided to pay us a portion of the rent she collected. Predictably, the deal fell apart, and the friend didn't end up staying. I couldn't figure out why things had gone down that way, but I wasn't shocked. The more I saw, the more I realized Carly's sense of entitlement was growing. Reggie didn't even start the buying process until after he had moved in and quit his job. Now, the only income he had to show for a mortgage company was his monthly military check, a check that, even with a veteran's loan, didn't count as proof of income. When he moved in, the rent went up to $1,000 a month. Still below market value, but enough for us to start laying out clear expectations. A new lease was signed, and we made it clear, if they hadn't started the buying process by mid-April 2024, we wouldn't renew the lease. No month-to-month options either. The decision was made, we were done. My husband and I had been through enough. But as a sign of good faith, we added a clause to the lease, Reggie and Carly would have the first option to buy the house. But it didn't take long for the situation to start unraveling. Here's where the chaos really starts. Since October, things have been a rapid-fire list of missteps and broken promises. First, Reggie paid the $750 Carly owed me in back rent. Then, Carly and Reggie dropped the bombshell, they wouldn't be buying the house after all. Why? Because the repairs were going to cost more than $150,000. The number seemed outrageous to me. I'd looked at those same repairs and budgeted less than $15,000 to redo the flooring. Repainting wouldn't cost more than a few thousand. And as for the bathroom remodel, they were planning to do the work themselves. We'd already handled the major damage in the bathroom for under $500. But it didn't stop there. Carly and Reggie couldn't even find a place to rent because they had 3 cats. So, they decided they were staying in the house after all. We told them, flat out, that we weren't renewing the lease. And that was when I made the mistake of telling Carly what we owed on our mortgage. She immediately came back with an offer to buy the house from us, $150,000. That's less than a third of the house's market value if we sold it as is. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I declined the offer, and then promptly went home to scream into pillows. They continued to tell me, over and over again, how desperate they were for money. Carly even debated setting up a GoFundMe. Meanwhile, she got 2 brand new tattoos and booked an international trip, one that she had already paid for in full. Reggie, on the other hand, still hadn't even found a part-time job. Then, there was the issue of the water heater. We had to install one in an emergency, and Reggie paid for it. But I'll have it fully paid off by the end of March. Carly quit her job, which meant that, after this week, their only source of income would be Reggie's military stipend. Now, Carly had the audacity to casually mention that we would need to renegotiate the rent for the next month. I didn't even entertain the idea. I told her, point blank, that there would be no negotiations. She had made a series of bad decisions, and now she would have to live with the consequences. But just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Carly sent me a text 2 days ago. She asked if she could pay me in food for this month's rent. Let that sink in. Food. Knowing Carly, I knew that the amount she'd offer would barely cover a few meals, maybe $75 worth of groceries, while the rent was closer to $500. I jokingly responded that neither the electricity company nor the insurance company accepted food as payment. She came back with a counteroffer. She would pay what it would cost to cover the utilities, and then the rest would be paid in food. I didn't respond. It's been a day and a half, and I'm done. I've made up my mind. They will pay in cash and nothing else. End of discussion. This has been my warning to anyone considering mixing business and friendship. Don't do it. If I had known what I was walking into, I never would have allowed Carly to move in. I need to clarify something that's been weighing heavily on me. The reason we ever let Carly move in was because she convinced us. She made it sound like she had nowhere else to go. She spun a tale of a chaotic home life with her mom, claiming that things had gotten so bad, so unsafe, that she was being kicked out right then and there. But that wasn't true. None of it was. Still, she panicked, hounding me relentlessly in person, texting, calling, until I couldn't take it anymore. My husband and I, caught off guard and overwhelmed, made a snap decision. We let her rent from us. I should have known better. It was all a manipulation tactic. And I learned that the hard way. After all that's happened, I knew I had to do something. I reached out to an attorney, and after explaining everything, we started looking at our options. The lawyer went through the lease and gave us a few clear paths forward. We could wait until May 1st, the date they were supposed to leave. If they didn't go by then, we could deliver an intent to sell notice. That would give them 90 more days to vacate the property once the lease expired. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. Or, we could deliver the intent to sell now, giving them until mid-June to leave. Still not ideal, but at least it would buy us time. If they stayed beyond the 90 days, we could file an unlawful detainer and have the cops physically remove them. The catch? We didn't have grounds for eviction just yet. Even with everything that had gone down, the courts are notoriously tenant-friendly. It's frustrating. But here's where it gets tricky. If their rent was late, we'd have grounds for eviction. And that would give them 14 days to either pay up or leave. If they paid, the eviction would end right there. Still not perfect, but better. The good news? They didn't qualify for squatters' rights. They hadn't been here long enough. But this whole thing? It's been a mess. So now, I'm making it my mission to tell Carly's mother everything Carly's done. I'm sure she has no idea. I've also started reaching out to mutual friends, telling them the truth. I've spent a lot of time reflecting lately. This situation has forced me to take a hard look at myself. I've realized a painful truth: Carly was never my friend. I thought I was helping someone in need, someone I considered a friend. But in the end, I just enabled her toxic behavior. I'm not proud of it. I've become a doormat, letting people walk all over me because I didn't know how to set boundaries. But I'm changing that. I've been on the phone with therapists, and I'm on a waiting list to see someone. I need to learn how to set boundaries. I don't want my kids picking up the bad habits that got me into this mess in the first place. And to everyone who's been wondering about my husband, yes, he's still with me. We've been through all of this together. I've never made a decision without his consent since we own the house 50/50. I take most of the blame, because Carly was my friend. I apologized to him, and we had a deep conversation about improving our communication. He apologized too, for not recognizing that Carly wasn't who she said she was. He didn't warn me about the manipulation. Update 2, this is hopefully the last one. I'm sorry it took so long to give an update. They're gone. They've been gone since April 1st. And no, it wasn't a joke, even though of course, the date makes it sound that way. Life's been so insane, so overwhelming, that I couldn't even bring myself to post sooner. They left the house a mess, but honestly, I can't say I'm surprised. They claimed they didn't have the time or money to finish their move, even though they had a full month left on their lease. Honestly, I'm just glad they're out. I'm pissed about the mess, but I'd rather clean that up than fight them in court. I told her mom everything, every last detail. And her mom was furious. She chewed Carly out a couple of times, once for leaving the house in such a state and twice for treating me and others so poorly. I've also started therapy. I'm working on setting boundaries, on learning how to stop people-pleasing. I'm not going to let myself fall into the same patterns again. The last time I spoke to Carly was yesterday. I found out from a friend that she joked about leaving the house a mess on purpose because she was mad at me. Can you believe that? Even if it was a joke, that kind of thing always has some kernel of truth. I confronted her. I had to ask why, even if it was a joke. She explained that emotions were running high, that she was stressed. She said she was frustrated with how little I did with the house while she was there. But that's not even close to the truth. I had repaired everything that needed fixing, and I did it quickly. And as for the garage, she was upset that my husband and I stored some of our things in it. I explained that, well, it's our house, and we're allowed to do that. There was plenty of room for her stuff, too. But even if there hadn't been, none of her vehicles would have fit anyway. They were all too long and none of them even ran, so there was no way she could have parked them in there. And yet, Carly left behind 2 vehicles, and she had to junk them out. She had told me she had someone lined up to keep them on their property, so she could work on them. But clearly, none of it made sense. I'm done trying to understand her logic. I'm done trying to make excuses. The last thing Carly said to me was an apology. But I don't believe for a second that she meant it. I think she just said it to make herself feel better. As for me, I'm just relieved that it's all over. Some good news, we're working with a buyer now, and we're taking steps to sell the house for what it's actually worth. Thank you to everyone who's read, commented, and given advice. It's been such a huge help through all of this. Sorry if the ending feels anticlimactic. But honestly, I'm just so relieved to be moving on.